All right, so on this computer calculator that we use, I'll just blow this a little more. So this deal is one that we just did today. Matt locked it up earlier. It's in New Richmond, Indiana. Super small town, but we're going to analyze it like we're going to take it down first, because that's what my guys are supposed to do, and then where we take it from there. So I've already got the numbers filled in. In some places, it shows it's a 2-1. The seller actually made it into a 3-1. If you keep doing deeper into the MLS, it does show a 3-1 now. 1,275 square feet, built in the 1900s. Zillow has it up for $854 in rent. Rent-O-Meter didn't have it, but PropStream did at $761. So I used that. We still got 12% in here because that's going to be my private money. We're looking at this as a sub-2 deal right now. PITI is $500 right now. We have an extra $100 for insurance for the sub-2 when the deed transfers. They're asking $63,000 for it. They owe $55,000. Obviously, we always put in $5,000 in our office because it pays for closing costs and it pays my commissions. So I'm going to have to come out of pocket to the seller $8,000. And basically, after you get done analyzing it, it's only giving me a $31 positive cash flow. So it's not a deal for me. If this doesn't end up being $400, I'm not interested.
Unknown caller.
Go away. So at that point, my team automatically, now we can play with this a little bit. If I turn it around, if I get this, let me shrink this back down a minute. If I get this to a different percentage, let's say I get 8% money. Come on, 8% money. Here we go. Now it's a $74 positive cash flow. Still doesn't work, so it's really not a deal for a takedown. However, this is a very small town, and Novations work very well. So on the calculator, the first thing these guys are actually going to do is actually run the top 4. We're going to use Zillow, Redfin, and this is PropStream, and then RPR is actually the MLS. It's a nationwide MLS. So it's giving us an average of $146,000. So we know that might be a little bit high, but that's what people can look at when they go on by looking at Redfin and Zillow. So we're fine with leaving that number there for a starting point. And that's all it is just a starting point. Now, when we go over to the Novation calculator, this is really what we locked this up for today, $63,000. Okay, that was through negotiation. We could have locked it up a little bit higher, and I'll show you why here in just a second. In this Novation calculator, though, we automatically put in 6% for the realtor's fees, buyer and seller, 3% each side. We also put in 3% for concessions so that we can help the buyer pay for closing costs, pay down or buy down the interest rate, whatever they might need. This is, I call it a slush fund because we may use it or we may not use it. I prefer not to, but if it's there if we have to. Because it's a Novation, we will be paying sellers closing costs. So we always put $2,000 in for the seller's closing costs. You also have repairs in here of $5,000 because if it's an FHA or VA loan, the appraiser is always going to find something that has to be fixed. So we're going to have to fix it. We do not charge that back to the seller. It's our expense. Preferably, hopefully it's conventional and we don't have any repairs. So if that's the case, it's going to give us about a $9,000 slush fund just to play with. If you run it on down on a Novation, we're going to look at probably 10 to 15% of what this number is, but we will probably run a manual comp on it also just to get it tighter. But just for this purposes, I'm just going to use this and run a 10% discount. So we're going to sell this, put it back on the market for $131,000 and see what happens. If that be the case, that's going to give us a $49,000 profit on this particular deal. Plus, you have $9,000 of slush fund. So this could end up about a $58,000 deal. Okay. Now, here's where, if you're wholesaling, and this is for you, Craig, if we go down to the wholesale calculator, you will see that everything from the top dropped down to the top 4. This needs a very light rehab, basically needs a new carpet and paint, so not much at all. If we come in and we buy it at either 50, 60, or 70%, This is what our potential profit spread is going to be. But the way I get to that is I look at what the flipper is actually going to make. So with the flipper usually wants to make either 30% if they have to pay for realtors' fees and closing costs, or 20% if it's already built in. Well, I already have that built in. So here's your realtor fee, here's your closing costs. So I'm at 20% of this number here, and that's about $30,000 that they want to make. That's typical on situations when you're dealing with flippers. Okay. Hey guys, welcome. I don't know if you got the memo. We're going through novations today, of how we actually analyze them, our paperwork from start to finish. And then we'll answer any questions. If you have questions in between, stop me, okay? And we'll do it as we go. And I've got my COO and my VP of TC and Dispos here also. So with this, we're going to be looking at the flipper. So then you go back, and at $64,000, because I showed you, we actually locked it up for 63. So if we're at 64, we're about a $30,000 potential spread compared to a $49,000 spread doing an Novation, which that could go to 58,000. And that's exactly why we go straight to Novation instead of going to a wholesale model. Plus, the flippers are sometimes hard to find. This is a rural area. So these are sometimes big bangers out there in the rural area. So usually we will always look at novations there instead of any type of wholesale, because you can't find any flippers out there or any remodel people at all. Okay. I think this town is less than 400 people, but it's not far from the city. So it can actually pull some people. So that's why we look at novations. Okay. Yeah. Freddie, go ahead. You're on your raise hand.
Yeah. So really what you're doing is you're taking 10% of the ARV, and that's what your novation price is going to be.
Yes. Now, what we typically do in-house is our acquisitions guys will walk over, talk to Kirsten or Levi and say, hey, will you comp this for me? What can you guys think you can sell this for? This is after they've already done their own comping. This is after Jason, my COO, has already underwritten the deal. And then we want to know what they can really sell it for before we do our final offer to the seller. Okay. So this is kind of a hypothetical. In reality, on this particular deal, Jason wrote it up that we're going to sell it for $100,000, not 131. But in this situation, that wouldn't be a wholesale deal anyway. Okay. So, but in reality, it's usually about 10 or 15% of ARV. Unless it needs a lot of work. If it needs a shitload of work, then obviously you got to price it accordingly.
And then you were looking at the flipper's profit just to kind of see what it makes. So when you look at the flipper's profit, that's just to see what that rehabber is going to end up making if they take it down. Yep,
exactly. Because if you're a good wholesaler, you're going to already figure out what the flipper can make. So usually it's 20% of ARV that is what they want to make after real estate commissions have been paid out. So you can play with this number right here, and that's exactly what I did. Usually I have 70% in there, but at 70%, they're making $23,000. They probably don't want the deal. If that's the case, now you'll see this number went up to 38,000. Okay, compared to 49. So it varies a little bit as to what that number is. Now, if you work, like Craig's got flippers in his area that he works with all the time, he knows what they like to make. If they like to make a $20,000 deal, then he knows that he can sell it to them at a different price than a different flipper that wants to make 20%. Okay, and that's knowing your in buy or your flipper that you're selling them to. And so you can play with that number. But every time you change that number, it's going to change that potential profit number. Okay, so just be aware of that.
So, John, what are you buying this for again, and what do you expect to list it for?
So we actually bought this at $63,000. Okay. So that's what it's under contract for today.
Okay. And you're planning on listing it for roughly 130?
We're going to look at it. So I will have Kirsten and Levi reanalyze it. When Jason underwrote it, he underwrote it at 100. So here, let's just change that to 100. It's a $21,000 deal with $8,000 worth of fluff.
Yeah.
Okay.
But like, let's say hypothetically, I mean, MLS, it's the world's buyers list. Everybody can see it. I'm sure your agent's posting it to Zillow. You know, you're buying this house for 63 grand, and then your seller sees it's listed online for 100 grand or 130 grand. So, like, how does that conversation go? Does that happen?
It will happen, and I'll have Jason go through that. Okay.
Good.
And I'll have Kirsten go through it because a lot of times she gets it on the back end. So I'll let her explain that when we get to that area. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions of what I've showed you so far?